March 14, 1942. Outside a train station in Busan, a 19-year-old seamstress named Han So-yeon stood with 42 other girls, staring at a sheet of paper in a soldier's hand. Her name was there, third from the top, written in the same neat, looping handwriting as every other name. Not her handwriting. Not even close. She had signed a contract 3 days earlier promising factory work and a hot meal. The signature she'd made was shaky, unsure. The one on this ledger was smooth, practiced, copied. It was the first time she understood what it meant to be cargo. This piece of paper would follow her across the sea, into rooms she could not leave, and through a war she did not choose. But it would also become the only weapon she had, because So-yeon was very good at noticing small details. And small details in wartime could mean the difference between someone living and someone disappearing. Our story follows a young woman who was promised work and given a number, who survived by learning the routines of men who thought she was invisible, who saved lives with a needle, a ledger, and the kind of courage no one would ever write down. So-yeon was born in a fishing village on the southern coast. Her father repaired nets. Her mother sold mackerel at the morning market. So-yeon was their second daughter, quieter than her older sister, better with her hands. By 15, she was the best seamstress in town. Steady fingers, clean stitches, no wasted thread. She could look at a person once and know their measurements. She could fix a torn hem so well you'd never know it had been broken. That skill felt like safety, like something no one could take away. When the war came closer, the Japanese soldiers needed workers. They put up notices in town squares. They promised wages, food, dormitories. Some girls went willingly, thinking it was a way to help their families. So-yeon hesitated, but by early 1942, the fish were harder to catch. The market had fewer buyers. Her father's hands were failing. One morning, a recruiter came to her house with a clipboard and a pen. He spoke politely, used her mother's name, mentioned hot meals and indoor work. Her mother looked at Se-yeon with tired eyes. Se-yeon signed. 3 days later, she was standing outside the train station with 42 other girls. Most of them were her age. Some were younger. They carried small bags. They wore their best clothes. The soldiers herded them into freight cars. No seats, no windows that opened. The door slid shut. Inside, Se-yeon sat on the floor with her knees pulled to her chest. She still had her sewing kit, small scissors, a few needles, a spool of black thread. She kept it in her pocket, hidden under her folded jacket. The train moved south, then west. Days blurred together. At one stop, a soldier opened the door and read names from the ledger. Se-yeon heard her name pronounced wrong. She didn't correct him. They crossed the sea on a cargo ship. Below deck, the air smelled like salt and rust and fear. A girl next to Se-yeon whispered her name, Minji, 16, from a village Se-yeon had never heard of. Minji said she'd been promised a job sewing military uniforms. Se-yeon nodded. She didn't say what she was starting to understand, that none of them would be sewing uniforms. When they reached land, the soldiers separated them into groups. So-yeon and 7 others were loaded into a truck. They drove through streets she didn't recognize, palm trees, heat like a weight on her skin. Someone whispered Philippines. The building they stopped at looked like a house. Wooden, 2 stories, shutters on the windows. A sign near the door said something in Japanese she couldn't fully read. Inside, a woman in a stern uniform checked their names against the ledger. Again, that same neat handwriting. The woman pointed at So-yeon and 3 others. Upstairs, last 2 rooms. So-yeon climbed the stairs. The room was small. A mattress on the floor. A basin of water. A curtain instead of a door. That night she learned what the contract had really promised. She thought about running. But the doors were locked. The windows were barred. The soldiers knew their faces. And even if she got out, where would she go? She didn't speak the language. She had no money. She didn't even know which direction was home. So she did what her mother had taught her. She survived by paying attention. She noticed the guards change shifts at 6 in the morning and again at 9 at night. She noticed the officer who drank too much had a habit of falling asleep in his chair by midnight. She noticed the laundry was collected every Tuesday and Thursday by a local woman who kept her eyes down and never spoke. She noticed the ledger was kept on a desk in the downstairs office, updated every morning before roll call. And she noticed one other thing. In the small courtyard behind the building, a Filipino woman worked as a cleaner. She wore a cross around her neck. She swept the same corner twice. She hummed hymns under her breath. One morning their eyes met. The woman's expression didn't change, but she nodded once, barely. Her name was Sister Magdalena. Not officially a nun anymore, but she still carried the title like a shield. She had been forced into service when the Japanese occupied the convent where she worked. She cleaned floors, washed dishes, and moved between buildings without anyone asking why. She also passed information, guard rotations, Supply schedules. Which officers were cruel, which were careless. Soyan met her in the courtyard one evening when the guards were eating dinner. Magdalena knelt by a bucket of water, scrubbing a floor that didn't need scrubbing. Suor Dion sat nearby, pretending to rest. Magdalena spoke without looking up. "You're the seamstress. How did you know? I see your hands. Always busy, always fixing things." Magdalena wrung out her cloth. "We could use someone who knows how to hide small things." That was how it started. Soyan had kept her sewing kit. She hid it under a loose floorboard. At first she used it to repair torn hems, fix buttons, small acts that made her feel like she still had a purpose. But Magdalena showed her a different use. Messages could be stitched into fabric, tiny slips of paper, folded tight, sewn into the lining of a pillowcase, into the cuff of a uniform jacket, into the hem of a tablecloth. Magdalena would whisper the information: a convoy arriving on Thursday, a supply route through the northern checkpoint, an officer who left his keys on the desk. Siwa Yan would write it down in letters, so small they looked like decorative stitching. Then she'd sew the note into something that would be laundered, delivered, carried to another building where someone else in the network could find it. It was slow, it was dangerous, but it worked. She wasn't alone in resisting. A Chinese girl named Lane, 17, helped by faking illness. Soap shavings in water made her vomit on command. A local midwife named Rosa, who worked at a small clinic nearby, would stall paperwork, delay transfers, forge stamps when she could. Together they moved like shadows. They whispered in hallways. They hid fear behind blank faces. Siwa Yan became the one who could manipulate the ledger. Not the ledger itself that stayed locked in the office, but the way it was used. Every morning an officer would check names against the registry. If a girl was missing, he'd mark it. If a girl was sick, he'd note it. If a girl was relocated, he'd stamp it and move on. Sayuline learned that the officer hated mornings. He drank coffee, read quickly, never double-checked. So when a girl was moved during a blackout or an air raid drill, Sayuline would bribe a guard with a repaired jacket to forget the ledger entry until the next day. By then, Rosa would have forged a transfer stamp. The girl's name would be marked relocated, and the officer would assume she'd been sent to another station. 3 girls left that way before winter. 3 names erased from the ledger before anyone could hunt them down. But the system was tightening. A new officer arrived in December. Younger, sharper, suspicious. He counted faces twice. He checked the ledger against the roll call every morning. He started asking questions. Sayuline felt the walls closing in. She stopped sleeping. Her hands trembled when she sewed. At night she lay awake and stared at the ceiling, running through every forged entry, every hidden note, every guard rotation she'd memorized. If one mistake surfaced, they would all pay for it. One night, Lan pulled her aside. "There's a rumor," she whispered. "A mass relocation. Next month. They're clearing out the stations. No one knows where we're going." Sayuline's chest tightened. "How many?" "All of us." If that happened, there would be no ledger to manipulate, no forged stamps, no second chances. They would be moved in groups, guarded closely, and anyone who tried to run would be shot. Then came the night of February 11th, 1943. An air raid. American planes passing overhead. The sirens screamed. The lights cut out. Guards scrambled to the shelters. For 10 minutes the building was chaos. Sayuline stood in the hallway, heart pounding, and made a decision. She ran to the storage room where they kept the old uniforms. Magdalena was already there, pulling jackets off hooks. 3 girls stood behind her. Minji, Lan, and a new girl from Taiwan whose name Sayuline didn't know yet. Magdalena handed them each a jacket. "Put these on. Walk fast, but don't run. The service corridor leads to the back gate. Rosa will be waiting." Sayuline looked at Magdalena. "What about you?" Siwa Yan wanted to argue, but there was no time. She helped the girls into the jackets, checked that their faces were covered, and led them down the corridor. Her hands shook, her needle kit pressed against her ribs. She kept one hand on Minji's shoulder and whispered, "Stay close." They reached the gate. Rosa was there, holding it open, her face pale. "Go, now." The 3 girls slipped through. Sao Xiaon hesitated. She could leave, she could run with them. But if she did, Magdalena and Rosa would be left to face the consequences alone. And there were still others inside. Girls who didn't have jackets. Girls who didn't know the corridor. Girls whose names were still trapped in that ledger. She made a choice. "I'm staying," she said. Rosa grabbed her arm. "You'll die." She turned back. The sirens stopped. The lights flickered on. She walked back through the corridor, folded the jackets, and returned to her room before the guards finished counting heads. The next morning, the officer checked the ledger. 3 names were marked relocated. He frowned, checked twice, but Rosa's stamp was clean. He moved on. Seo Xian sat on her mattress and exhaled. Her hands were still shaking, but she had done it. Not just once. 3 times in one night. 3 lives pulled from the ledger before it could close on them. She thought that would be enough. But the new officer kept digging. He started cross-referencing names with older logs. He noticed discrepancies. By March, he was asking for a full audit. Seo Xian knew she was running out of time. She started planning one final operation, a blackout raid, a mass escape during the next air drill. But before she could act, the ledger was moved, locked in a safe, counted daily. The audit came in April. They found the forged stamps, the missing names. The timeline didn't match. The officer demanded answers. Magdalena was arrested first, then Rosa, then 2 guards who had been bribed. Seo Xian waited for her turn. She burned her notes. She hid her needle kit under the floorboard. She rehearsed her lies, but they never came for her. She didn't understand why until later. Magdalena had confessed to everything. She'd said the guards had been tricked. She'd said Rosa had been forced. She'd said the seamstress had no idea what was happening. Magdalena was executed in May. Seo Xian learned this from another girl who overheard the guards. She felt her chest collapse. She couldn't breathe. She wanted to scream, but she couldn't. Not here. Not now. So she sat on the floor of her room and pressed her fists into her eyes until the pressure became something she could carry. The war dragged on. The air raids grew more frequent. The supply lines broke down. The station started running out of food. Some girls got sick. Some disappeared. Seo Xian kept her head down. She sewed when she was asked to. She said nothing. She waited. On August 15, 1945, the soldiers gathered them in the courtyard. An officer stood on a crate and read a statement in Japanese. Someone translated. The war was over. Japan had surrendered. They were being released. Seo Xian didn't believe it. Not until the gates opened. Not until the soldiers left. Not until she walked out into the street and realized no one was stopping her. She had no money. No papers. No way home. She wandered through Manila for weeks, sleeping in doorways, eating scraps. Eventually she found a church that took in displaced women. A priest helped her send a letter to Korea. 3 months later, she got a reply. Her mother was alive. Her father had died in 1943. Her sister had married and moved inland. Seo Xian returned home in early 1946. She didn't tell her family what had happened. She said she'd worked in a factory. She said it had been hard. She said she was lucky to survive. Her mother didn't ask questions. Neither did her sister. For years, Soyeon lived quietly. She worked as a seamstress again. She never married. She kept her needle kit in a drawer, wrapped in cloth, untouched. At night she dreamed of ledgers, of names written in someone else's handwriting, of girls who never came home. She didn't speak about the war for 30 years. In 1975, a researcher came to her village, asking questions, looking for survivors. Soyeon listened but didn't respond. The researcher left a card. Soyeon kept it in her drawer next to the needle kit. In 1982, she finally wrote a letter. She told the researcher about Magdalena, about Rosa, about the ledger and the forged stamps and the girls who escaped. She didn't use her real name. She signed it a seamstress. The letter was published in a small journal. A few people read it. A few more believed it. But most of the world moved on. The official records listed the 3 escaped girls as relocated or missing. Magdalena was buried in an unmarked grave. Rosa's name appeared in no archive. Soyeon's name was never added to any list of resistors or heroes. She died in 1998, at 75, in the same village where she was born. Her sister found the needle kit in her drawer after the funeral. She didn't know why it mattered. She threw it away. This is the story of a girl who signed a paper and became a number, who learned that survival sometimes means staying behind, who saved lives not with speeches or guns, but with thread, patience, and a willingness to be invisible. Her name was Han Soyeon. She was 19 when the ledger first marked her as cargo. She was 41 when she finally told someone the truth, and she was 75 when the world forgot her again. How many others like her are still waiting to be seen?